Welcome to the new series of ASAP Conversations. Some of you may have already listened in on our earlier series of COVID conversations. What we are planning to do in this series is to have conversations around big picture issues, which affect all of us personally as well as politically, particularly when it comes to, looking out for our sexual and reproductive health and rights. These could be issues like, say, gender, patriarchy, the political systems, neoliberalism, sustainable development, digital freedom, healthcare and healthcare services. Now, as the COVID pandemic has shown us very clearly, healthcare providers and healthcare systems, whether they are frontline workers or specialists, all have a very critical role to play in ensuring that we maintain a society which is safe and stable and progressive. And Rudolf Virchow, who is known as the founder of social medicine, had said something very interesting after his failed attempt to control the typhus epidemic in Prussia. He said medicine is a social science and politics is nothing but medicine on a large scale. And I think what we are seeing currently with the COVID pandemic and the way that countries have responded to it, this is a very powerful and a very truthful statement. So what we want to do as part of the series, some of the conversations we're going to have are with healthcare providers, people from the medical profession who are looking to understand as well as reform the system, particularly in the context of the way it deals with gender and sexuality issues. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Suchitra Dalvi. I'm coordinator of the Asia Safe Abortion Partnership. I am also a practicing gynecologist, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome here our guest in today's conversation, Dr. Aparna Santhanam. She is a very well-known name in what is called the beauty industry, and she's a gold medalist as well as the author of many best-selling books. But she's not here today to talk to us about any beauty tips. She is in fact going to have a conversation with me on trying to deconstruct the concept of beauty and desirability, and also, our pursuit of the same. So what is it that is the framing within which we are pursuing this, what is desirable? So Aparna, you and I both know that as medical students, we went through just an insane amount of facts and figures and textbooks and information and knowledge and skill building. But the one thing that we were never spoken to about is the socio-cultural political context within which we were going to practice as individual practitioners, or within which the health system in fact is based. So in the context of India, where being fair and beautiful is seen as a very desirable requirement for young women, particularly as they reach what is called a marriageable age, there becomes almost a desperation to achieve that level of desirability and be eligible, for a good match. So in your practice, what have you seen in this which you could share with us?
Sure. First, thank you, Suchitra, for having me on this platform. And I'm quite in awe of the kind of work your organization does, and quite happy to be a part of this conversation. It's also nice to be debating stroke chatting with you after what, nearly 3.5 decades, I think, since we left school and went our separate ways and then joined back in medicine again.
Absolutely.
And you're absolutely right. Medical curriculum, not only does it not teach you anything about the socio-political gender construct, it doesn't even teach you something as simple as the empathy you need to actually treat and heal a patient. Everything is in the paradigm of disease and alleviation of disease, and therefore we're very geared towards looking at symptoms and treating the symptoms. So I think the shift is many, many degrees behind what you and I are discussing today. But there is a movement and things are changing. And to come back to the topic we're discussing today, yes, beauty, I think all around the world is currency, especially for women. That's a fact that we cannot unfortunately get away from. It is considered as currency to be beautiful, and a lot of places, a lot of women do get ahead using their currency of beauty forward. But in the construct of India, it assumes even greater importance, because marriage as such is a big destination factor in India still, and it doesn't matter how many decades or years we've moved on from where we were. I mean, if you look at one of the top trending programs on Netflix, it is the Indian matchmaking program, which is completely, you could shut your eyes and you could be 15 years behind when you're watching the program. It doesn't even matter. And I see the same situation in my clinic. Unless people have hardcore skin diseases for which they come at any age, usually there's an inflection point at which they would walk into a dermatologist, especially a cosmetic dermatologist. So one point is, of course, when they've just graduated from school and college and they're looking for their first job. And that seems to be also a point at which the color of their skin seems to play a very big role. And it's actually a reflection of who we are as a people, right? Because many of them come wanting to get fairer because they think that's going to get them into the job market easier, or even ahead in the job market easier. So that's one. And the second is, of course, marriage. Parents start stressing from the time A girl is about 18, 19. I will have mothers who will drag their daughters most reluctantly. You know, very many of the
Right.
daughters are not interested in coming in at all. And they'll start saying things like, she's got pimples, she doesn't take care, so they're healing with marks. Her skin has become so dark, so dull, she doesn't eat properly. Please make her fairer. I mean, that's one of the biggest needs. And the funny thing is, even when they don't articulate it as such, because some people think they're no longer stuck in that paradigm of fair and dark, so they don't
Right.
want to say, make me fairer, but they'll use all these, you know, words which couch fairness, like, can you bring some glow on my face? Can
Mm.
you reduce the pigmentation? Can I have an even toned skin? Can I get a clear complexion? Now, all these are actually just euphemisms of being fair. And in fact, I wrote about it recently that,
Right.
you know, given the movement around the world about color and the kind of discrimination that people of color face, we ourselves being people of color have to recognize how discriminatory we are in looking at our own color. And I think that's very well reflected in a dermatological practice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, so I just want to share some experience, my as a gynecologist. So, besides being fair and now, of course, you have to glow and be lovely or whatever the paradigm is, virginity is another very important factor. And, virginity was in our textbooks, if you recall, in the forensic textbook.
Right.
And with the assumption that we were talking only about the virginity of a woman, because the virginity of a man was never anything to be discussed. And because we've kind of put virginity, which is not a medical condition, in the medical textbooks, I'm now seeing this sort of alarming subspecialization of gynecology coming up, which is called cosmetic gynecology. I mean, right in the name, they already know it's not therapeutic, right? It's called cosmetic gynecology. And they're offering you something called a revirgination. The first time I read that, I did a double take. I was like, what does this even mean? So they're going to offer you hymenoplasty. But it doesn't end there. They have a rate card. They're expecting, it's like a tourism. They're expecting people to come to India from outside for the surgery. And India is apparently a very popular destination for having hymenoplasty done. And in that context, then I sort of went down this rabbit hole and tried to see what else was being offered. They are offering vaginoplasties. They are offering labia minora to be made symmetrical, labia majora to be made less fat, and they are offering something called a clitoral hodectomy. Now, to my mind, this whole set of things, as you said, euphemistically, fair is now being called glow. To me, this sounds really like just a deconstructed female genital mutilation. I mean, you are creating a whole set of surgeries by telling the woman that you're not good enough the way you are. And to me, and I would imagine also for you, I think the choice that anyone makes is a valid choice. It may not seem the most appropriate choice from our context, but everybody has the right to choose, whether it is a skin lightening or a vaginal tightening or whatever else they would like to do. But I think it's important for us to have a conversation about the context within which these choices are being made. Like, are they really as free and neutral and without any baggage as we would imagine? So what has been your experience in this context?
Right.
What is
So,
the
I mean,
framework within which these choices are being made?
so these are many interesting points that you've raised, Suchitra. I'm going to take it in reverse order. The first, of course, when we talk about choice, right? And, I, in my career, trained more than 100 dermatologists to become cosmetic dermatologists. I've designed, consultations to actually help people see what they can improve on their skin, and all of this under the garb of choice. And yes, choice is important. We really believe that apart from the old adage of do no harm, which every doctor is supposed to follow, the second thing that has happened today, because of so much elective medicine, in every field, whether it's ophthalmology, gynecology, dermatology, I mean, there is a lot of elective medicine that people can opt for. And in the context of elective medicine, it is not up to us as doctors to judge anyone's choices. And as human beings, it's even less so that we should judge someone else's choice, because like you said, the validity of a choice does not depend on whether it's a good or bad choice, because good or bad itself is a perception, right? What I consider good or bad may not be exactly what you consider good or bad. So this is not about taking away people's right to make a choice. Now, at the same time, I'd just like to underscore, for any new doctor who's setting out to practice today, doctors are also not just service providers, right? We're not like running a restaurant where someone comes in with a little menu card and says, look, can I order ABC? And then you just provide it. And to just give an example, if you were a cardiologist and a patient walked into your clinic with, let's say, 3 blocks, which is happening because of a poor lifestyle. The patient is highly overweight, cholesterol is extremely high, he's hypertensive. And he comes and tells you, look, I don't want to change any of that. Every time I get a block, you just tent me and I'll walk out. No cardiologist is going to do that because you know that it's not right. You're harming the patient by doing it, and that harm is quantifiable. In
Yeah.
elective procedures like cosmetic gynecology or cosmetic dermatology, you cannot quantify the harm because the
Mhm.
harm is not just physical, the harm is also psychological and it's mental. And when you come to cosmetic gynecology, in fact, I was introduced to it a couple of years ago at one of the aesthetic conferences that I attended, and someone came and spoke about it. And I think they were just announcing the first cosmetic gynecology conference in India at that point of time. The thing that struck me the most when they kept talking about vaginal tightening,
Yeah.
and they kept saying how you can tighten it more and more, and that will increase the pleasure of women, thereby indicating that you're actually doing this to give the woman more of sexual choices. That's not really true.
Mhm.
Because the tighter and tighter the vagina, it's also a simple understanding of how the female anatomy works. It's not that the pleasure for the woman is greater, it's just that the
Yeah.
pleasure for the man is greater, So all of these emboldening sexual choices don't really sexually liberate the woman either. So it's not, I think a lot of this is rooted in the patriarchal society that we live in. And all these demands also come from the men, they come from the fathers, very often from the women also, because women also are inheritors of this patriarchy and we perpetuate it as well. So we often see a mother perpetuating the same thing that she was subjected to. And I think recently in that movie Thappad, they said it very beautifully when they said, everyone has to compromise, everyone has to adjust, because that's the construct that you're brought up in.
Right.
And that's
Right.
what all of us tend to take forward. We all do it to some extent in our own lives, but when it's done as a professional in a larger canvas, then it becomes far more dangerous, because when you have a husband, I had someone in my clinic 2 months ago, the husband coming and saying, look, my wife used to be very fair. Now she's got these big, big dark patches. Can you get rid of it? It's not really her choice. He's bringing her in. She's going along with it. And you can say
Yeah.
that she's choosing to lighten her skin by choice. But at the end of the day, whose choice is it? And even if it's my own choice, that choice is made under a certain set of circumstances which I've
Absolutely.
inherited or which I'm under duress to accept. So if given this construct, I don't really know that unless we start talking about these issues, how are young women really going to make a choice, or even older women?
Absolutely.
Because the choice you make is going to be, you're a victim of choice making as much as the atmosphere around you is created, right?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And this is where I want to sort of link it back to the work that ASAP does in the context of, the personal is political.
Right.
So every choice you make, you think you're doing it as an individual, but when you look at it as a bird's eye view, you see that these are actually political constructs.
Right.
And what you said quite rightly about, being inheritors of a certain limited space within your making choices, we hear this a lot in an issue which we work with on sex determination and
Right.
sex selection. So for those of us in our audience who don't know, sex determination or sex selection is the process by which a couple wants to ensure they have the child of a particular sex, either a male or a female. And in our country, most often it's male. So this again brings me back to that politics of desirability. We are very often told, oh, it's the women who want to have a son.
Yeah.
But when you step back and see, why does the woman want to have a son?
Right.
Because you've given her social rewards as the mother of a son. She can see that if you're the mother-in-law of a son, as a mother of a son, you reap rewards all the way till you become a mother-in-law also. You
Absolutely.
rather, compared to when you are the mother of a daughter, you are constantly seen as something lesser than all the way through.
Correct.
So obviously women are making that choice because they're seeing the rewards.
Right.
So how do you create a system in which, as you said quite rightly, we speak out about it? And I would say it's not just that the people who are coming to us and making the choices need to hear this. I think the medical community also needs to start talking about
Correct.
it and hear about it, because we are agents of those choices. We are
Absolutely.
facilitating those choices
Correct.
in some way or the other. So have you had much success talking to your colleagues in your profession around these issues?
So it is difficult. I mean, let's also be very honest about the fact that cosmetic professions, gynecology, dermatology, cosmetic ophthalmology, plastic surgery, they're all far more lucrative than the traditional, the traditional
Sure.
counterparts. So for a doctor, it's also something that is their bread and butter. And, it is very easy to assume that I am not advocating people to elect for these. People are choosing this when they
Right.
come to me. My job as a physician is to outline whether it's safe or unsafe, determine whether you're a correct candidate for this procedure or not, and to go ahead. I think
Right.
it takes a little higher thinking to, sit back and say, look, let's also look at your motivations for doing this. So for instance, we have people coming for lip enhancement, and sometimes they come every 3 to 4 months where You don't need to have such big lips. I mean, at the end of the day, there is a reason why you're seeking more and more of any kind of enhancement, right? It may start with correcting something that you think is disfiguring, then it goes on to enhancing something that you think is beautiful, and then you sort of get addicted. And somebody wrote a book called Beauty Junkies way back in the 80s, where they said seeking these sort of cosmetic enhancements itself is like a drug, just like taking any other drug. Once you get a taste of it, you keep going back for it. And therefore, I think doctors need to start having these conversations and be open about, am I going to say no because I'm exploring the psychological aspect of why this person wants it? If somebody is going through a divorce and they come and say, look, I want to, put fillers on my face so that I look younger. Now, if they're not a proper candidate, or their motivation for getting those fillers is not right, it's not going to give her the satisfaction that she wants. It's going to get her to come back to you again and again needlessly for doing that procedure. And therefore, it's important to start guiding those choices. And even if we don't guide, at least outlining what could be the fallout of some of these choices, that just doing repeated injectables or doing repeated minor plastic surgery itself is traumatizing, because you are in some ways changing what your body is. And fashion trends also keep changing. It's not that, what is acceptable today. So you have a very lean, twiggy look, which is popular for 3 years, and then they want you to have a fuller face. So it's not like you do something and it's done and you're done with it, and to, what you were talking about, making the choice to have a male child, or making the choice to have bigger breasts or bigger lips. Now, it's also trying to claim some agency, right? Because if you find that you're powerless and you want to claim some agency back so that you have a negotiating position, then you have to play by the rules that is set for you, right? And some of this has also come down to us from Western influences. I don't think if you look at completely the Indian context, there are certain things that Indians used to hanker after, like fair skin. But I don't think, breast enhancement or butt implants, all those were not common in India. They're becoming very common now. And I think it's a Western influence, because when I was doing some training in the US, one of the things I came across is, many parents, as a high school gift to their children, they actually give the girls a breast, a boob implantation surgery, like a breast enhancement surgery as a high school gift. So it's a different culture which operates differently. We can't really completely replicate it here. And I think there's a lot of conflict in people getting some degree of exposure, but also tethered by their, their political connections that they come with, the socioeconomic situation that they are in. All this put together drives choices which are not necessarily the right choices.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And so this brings me on to the next part I wanted to discuss with you, is about, the whole paradigm of desirability, which kind of drives a lot. So I was recently reading up a little bit before we were going to talk today, and I came across this very interesting quote from Oscar Wilde, who, of course, is an old favorite. He says, everything in this world is about sex, except sex. Sex is about power. And I found that, obviously we may have read it as school kids and I never really focused on it. But now when I was reading it, I thought, it's very interesting, because everything is, sex is about power. And a lot of these transactions, even when you say you need a fair virgin girl to marry, eventually what you're saying is, within the patriarchal construct, you want to control women's sexuality so that she is sexually pure, so that the seed of only that one man is in her womb, and you have this inheritance system, So we don't see how patriarchy and misogyny are still working as invisible structures around everything in terms of desirability. And I came across this very interesting show you may have seen on Netflix called Connected. The first episode was on surveillance. And as part of that, he interviewed someone who's a journalist from Paris, who spoke about her experience with Tinder. And she said Tinder actually has a back-end algorithm which decides where you stand in their desirability matrix. And then they will match you with only who they think is of your status of desirability. So you never actually have a free choice in that context. And as I was seeing that, I thought, oh, wow, that's very important to what we're going to discuss today. Because who is creating this matrix of desirability? You have to be fairer, you have to be taller, and that statistic from the US which says that taller CEOs and taller men and taller people get paid more as CEOs, and they're more likely to become presidents. So there's this whole, telegenic desirability issue also coming in. So how would you deconstruct this? What are the ways in which you see it happening, including for men? Because that's something I just want to say, that it's not only women who are victims of this desirability, sort of pursuit, but it's also the men.
It's also the men,
share about that.
See, it's a very, I mean, for the last 20, 30 years at least, it has become increasingly a very externally driven. Judge a book by its cover. Now, increasingly, you find all of these self-help videos about how
Yeah.
the first 3 minutes is when you make an impression on someone,
Yeah.
so power dressing, what you're
Yeah.
supposed to wear, and all of that. And obviously, sexuality means power, and which is why it is a part of this, you know. So, especially for men, you know, there's a lot of pressure to have a head full of thick hair, to be tall, and of course, being tall is not a choice. The amount of hair you have is not a choice, but you can get a transplant and get more
Yeah.
hair. You can wear shoes with heels which make you look
Yeah.
taller, but net the pressure to look good in a particular way, a cookie cutter kind of good looks, has become universal and unfortunately very rampant, you know. So even when you pick up a Vogue magazine, now today there are, you know, all the Vogue people on Twitter and Vogue and everyone are talking about diversity in looks, but that
Yeah.
is only to put on a magazine cover, you know, and even that you'll obviously see some, you know, Asian background women, some Hispanic women, and African American tokenism women. But by and
Yeah.
large, the you know, the standards that we hold ourselves up to in beauty are all cookie cutter, largely West driven, because we're all still, you know, very
Yeah.
Anglo. I mean, much of the world has been colonial, is still Anglophilic in nature.
Yeah.
The other half is driven by what America wants. So
Yeah.
between the two, to have a voice for diversity in beauty is very difficult. So even though we increasingly talk more about women of color and how women of every type can be beautiful, for both men and women, the standards that they're held to are very clearly and narrowly defined. And most people, even if not out in public, in the privacy of their own homes and mirrors, they hanker after wanting to look like that, you know. So even women who are not extremely obese, but just, let's say, overweight, or have the Indian body shape where you've
Yeah.
got a little bit of hips and a little bit of tummy, you still want to be very thin, and people couch it again under being healthy, but a lot of it is wanting to be thin to
Yeah.
look good. And you're right, the pressure is there on the men as well, but the pressure on the men is in no way comparable to the pressure on the women, you know, because the pressure on men is still men who are in that desirability frame. And I'm, you know, expanding that to not just look at marriage, but
Yeah.
in the time of marriage, for career advancement, to become a powerful man like a CEO or a head of a
Yeah.
political party. Now, those are times at which their good looks become an additional agency for them. But for women, it's not like that. It's every woman, you know, it doesn't matter if,
True.
you know, you're in domestic service, you're a doctor, you're a scientist, you're an engineer, you're a whatever it is, you know, beauty has become compulsory. And in fact, you know, I was in a discussion where we said when we were in school, let's say 30 years ago, there was a clear division, right? You had like the brainy girls who would like really study well and do well, and you know, they were called the brainy girls of the class. You had the sporty girls, you know, who would always
Yeah.
participate in stuff, and then you had the really good looking girls who would, you know, start waxing at a very young age. They're the
Yeah.
ones who would dress really perfectly, and then there were the arty girls who would draw well, be part of
Yeah.
the arts and crafts, and everybody had a place in school. Now today it's not like that. Every young adult movie that you see, it doesn't matter where you are,
True.
brainy, arty, you still have to have beauty. Like beauty has become something that's a base
True.
condition. It's no
True.
longer that, oh, you know, she's beautiful, I'm not, it's genetics. It's she's beautiful, I'm aspirational, I need to
True.
get where she is. And it's not that once you get the beauty, you can relax as well. You cannot, because then maintaining it becomes a full-time
Absolutely.
job in itself. And you look at all the actresses of today, 18, 20-year-olds are being given mother roles, and 25-year-olds are being given grandmother roles. You know, it's like acceleration of aging is so fast that there's no
I
time
know.
to enjoy youth. When you're young, you're worried about having clear skin. The moment you start getting older, you're worried about your skin sagging and lines coming up. So the whole ideal is everything should be fair, everything should be tight, everything should be right. There's just no wriggle room to say there is anywhere where you
True.
can
True.
navigate these waters to be yourself, you know. And what really amuses me is, especially on social media, you've got a lot of now Instagram handles, you know, where the language has changed, even the industry language has changed. So industry no longer tells you to change anything about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about acceptance and slight improvements. Everybody talks that, you know, no one says become fairer.
Yeah.
Everyone says reflect your inner glow. Or they
Yeah.
say, you know, self-care is the best thing you can do for yourself. Don't worry so much about your family and everything. Spend some time on yourself. But when
Yeah.
you deconstruct what is self-care, it is getting involved in beauty and wellness services
Yeah.
and products. When you say make time for yourself, what is it? It is go to a dermatologist to try and see if you can improve. So the whole construct is do all of this to feel good, but you have to keep improving yourself. You're not okay the way you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
There is
Absolutely.
room for improvement. And I
Yeah.
think that is the most debilitating thing for a young person today, you know, and I'm saying young in the context of maybe 18 to 40, at which time you're probably ready to say, you know, I don't care about anything, I shall be myself. But those big
Yeah.
years of your youth are spent being so insecure, because from every side that insecurity is driven in so many insidious ways, you know.
Absolutely. It's kind of like, the sine theta over cos theta tending to infinity. Like you're just constantly struggling behind that. Jam yesterday, jam tomorrow, never jam today. You're never good enough.
Correct.
But on the other hand, you're worth it, So they keep you sort of stuck between these two paradigms. You spoke about 18 to 40. So I just wanted to say, coming back to that whole conversation I was having on vaginoplasty, some of the websites actually advertised it. Their target is women in their 40s.
Yeah.
So even then, even then you can't put it behind you, because they are advertising it as, for your 25th wedding anniversary, gift your husband a vaginoplasty. Okay, I found that offensive to the extreme. I mean, I almost literally didn't know how to react to that. And then I was thinking, I've never seen a Viagra advertisement directed towards a man saying, gift your woman, like a really good erection for your 25th wedding anniversary. So those ads are also directed towards male sexual pleasure. The women are also made to feel they're not good enough. So I can just imagine, as you said, this whole validation and not feeling good enough, low self-esteem, low self-worth, and constantly being tangled in these very external parameters. Like there are no conversations around foreplay, intimacy,
No.
relationship building. And we spoke earlier about validity of choices. I feel a lot of these choices are not made from a place of empowerment. They're made from a place of desperation. It's like, I'm not good enough, so this is the choice in front of me. Like just being who I am is not a valid choice.
Correct.
I have to in some way improve myself, either rejuvenate, be younger, be prettier. Your skin has to bounce and your lips have to be full, and like those, like Jessica Rabbit, those sort of very, very cartoon-like caricatures of your own life. Everything has to be bigger, better, more beautiful. So how do you see us, moving forward? Do you see that there is a potential for a society to be like post-gender or post-beauty? What is going to help us go there?
So that's a very difficult question, right? I mean, let's take beauty first. I don't think we're anywhere close to a post-beauty society anywhere in the universe. You know, I don't think, like I said right in the beginning, beauty will continue to be currency. Maybe we will enlarge our definition of beauty. Maybe some degree of diversity will truly come in. And, the more people in the beauty industry, the ones who are the icons of beauty, like film actresses, the more they speak up and the more they stand for not cookie cutter beauty, at least we can expect some diversity in beauty. And
Right.
I mean, you see it happening both here and in Hollywood. Kate Winslet is standing up and saying that she will not do botulinum toxin on her face. I think that's a good message for all women, that you can continue acting or being in a field where you're seen by hundreds of people every day, and you still don't have to be anything other than yourself. So I think we'll have to expand the scope of beauty to make it more diverse, to make all of us more accepting of what looks beautiful, that it's not necessarily just a sharp nose or very large eyes, or,
Yeah.
and in fact, when we study cosmetic dermatology, Suchitra, we're given these proportions, like the face is supposed to be divided into 3 here and
Right.
9 here, and from the angle of the mouth to the angle of the nose, the angle is supposed to be defined, the philtrum is a particular way to actually define what beauty is. Maybe those kind of
Wow.
things we can throw out, and concentrate on one, accepting that all women are, and all men for that matter, are beautiful. There will always be some who will aesthetically be more pleasing than others. It's like art, or it's like great architecture, or whatever.
Yeah.
Some people are more genetically blessed. They will look better than others, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs to get there, or that is the only destination to get to. So I think it's more important to strive for diversity in beauty, more inclusiveness, to include more icons of beauty which are not the cookie cutter images of beauty. So I don't visualize a society beyond beauty. I think as long as human race exists, there will always be a cachet and a currency for beauty. But by having such dialogue, we can make it more diverse and more inclusive. That movement will be slow. And here's where I think doctors can play a very big role, because we are actually agents of social change. People come to us not just for medical treatment, but for advice. They come thinking that we possess a certain degree of wisdom. Also, you get those 15-20 minutes with someone when they're a little vulnerable, when they're talking to you, when they're expressing, you know, whatever desires they have in a safe space without thinking they're going to a therapist. So that's a very powerful time to try and bring about some individual change, and to also start talking about it in forums and conferences, you know, like the dialogue that you and I are doing, putting it out there. I think that's important. When it comes to gender, I think the battle may be even harder, because, you know, at the end of the day, gender politics are all about power play, right? Like you spoke about sex as well. And I think first it's important for, you know, and the movement that's been happening, I think it's a good movement, which is for women first to get together and empower each other. You know, very often you find that in the construct of patriarchy itself, women tend to become more anti-women than the men are. And, you know, a lot of people make these loose comments like, I'd rather have a male boss, my female boss never understands me, or, you know, my female boss is always down on me and she's nicer to my male colleagues. And I think first, if we stop judging each other as women, if we stop judging our choices, then at least, you know, in fact, I was in a forum last week, it was called Men for Women. And one of the questions I was asked is, why don't women make more of these, you know, networking buddy frameworks that men do? You know, many offices, many industries, if a man moves from an organization to another organization, he takes his entire team with him.
Right.
Women, these examples are few and far in between, you know, like people hold up Indira Nooyi as one example, or, you know, there are a couple of others they hold up, but it's not universal. I think first is to realize another woman is not a threat. The fact that another woman is a threat is a result of patriarchy, you know.
Absolutely.
Naomi Wolf says
Absolutely.
in the beauty myth, you know, she says that men for years have used beauty to pit women against each other. And, you know, we've fallen into the trap and we're all finding it difficult to exit, you know. Like a lot of women say this, they say we dress so that other women will look at us, you know, and there's always this sort of critical, oh, her bindi doesn't go with her sari.
There's a competition. There's a competition among women themselves.
Yeah. Have to wear this pair of jeans. So I've never heard a man comment about another man, you know, you're wearing a color that doesn't suit you, or, you know, it just doesn't come. Men don't think about each other in the context. Women do, because we pit ourselves against another woman in the construct of beauty. So that's something I think we need to stop doing.
Yeah.
And stop doing consciously. So again, have conversations about that. And I think all gendered conversations eventually will have to include the men in the conversation, because at the end of the day, the way men and women interact, there is a historical precedence, there is a cultural precedence for that to change. These conversations have to start. So while we need to have our feministic approach and talk about, you know, what women should be doing, women can do anything and women must do anything, it's also necessary to take the women and men along with us, because otherwise I don't think a gendered change can come about with only one gender. You know, it would be like a reverse patriarchy, because for centuries, you know, men have had their way. Now, if women want to have their way only on their own, I don't think we'll find equity, because equality is very difficult to find. The sexes are completely different. But if we strive for a degree of equity where both have their space under the sun, I think that is something that is possible to achieve in society.
Absolutely, absolutely wonderful words. So I'm going to kind of wind up on those, because I really can't say anything more to that. I think you summed it up really beautifully. But just to reflect on what you said as a, you know, the space that we give as a doctor, when I have a woman in front of me, I see ourselves just, as you said, agents of change, but also, you know, in a very powerful position to bear witness to what is happening at a very personal and a private level, which very few people have the opportunity to. And it is my sense that the medical profession doesn't really utilize it in the way that it can. It's a very powerful space. It's a very powerful piece of information that we have about someone's, you know, something which they feel very either stigmatized or shamed about speaking about openly, and they will speak to us. So just in closing, I want to say, you know, there are some very important words said by Sarah Dobson in an article she wrote about advocacy being agency as well as activism. So agency is when you work to help a single individual to navigate their way through the system. But advocacy, activism part of advocacy is when you're trying to bring about a paradigm change in the system, so that you are able to, you know, bring about social change in a large way. So I think reflecting on that, I feel it's really important for medical professionals and the healthcare system to become healers. In the sense that they were meant to be, and to become a space where people can be genuinely healthy, you know, in that famous definition, which is that health is not just the absence of disease or infirmity, but genuinely mental, physical, emotional well-being. And I think that's something, hopefully more and more conversations like this will bring people towards having that discourse. And just to say that thank you very much, Aparna. It's been really wonderful having this conversation with you. For those of you who want to know more about either Dr. Aparna's work or ASAP, there will be links below this video, so you can take a look at that. And yeah, we hope that more and more of you will join us in these conversations. Maybe more healthcare professionals who would like to have more conversations with either one of us, you're most welcome to contact us. And thank you once again, Aparna. As you said, it's been a wonderful journey. 35 years ago, we were in school together. And now to see that we've both made our ways through very different pathways, but going towards the same destination is just a really heartwarming thing. So thanks a lot. And
I mean, don't thank me. It's been such a pleasure for me to do this conversation with you and to connect up back with you. And I see possibilities of more things we can do together in the future. And good luck to you for all the wonderful work that you're doing. And yeah, thank you for having me on this platform. Really, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful for you for making the time. I know you're also very busy. You just came from your consulting this afternoon, but we are taking this opportunity of the pandemic and, most people not traveling as much to be able to get hold of the experts and the like-minded folks. So it's been really wonderful as well. Thanks, Aparna.
Thanks, Suchitra. Bye. See you soon.
Bye.